we're going to go over some wiring stuff that people have asked about, and I figure I can go through that pretty easily, except it will probably take a couple different videos. This video I'm just going to focus on doing wire splicing or any sort of electrical joints that you need to make in a automotive application. This is going to cover both, cars, trucks, vans, boats, RVs, semi-trucks, ATVs, UTVs, any sort of power sports, basically everything short of residential and commercial property type of applications. So the first thing that we're going to take a look at when you're looking to purchase electrical connectors for your project, a lot of people will go to somewhere like a Home Depot or a Lowe's or Menards if they have those in your area. And you're going to see a lot of this style of connector. You've got your wire nuts and these newer style connectors. These are either a push-in style electrical connector or this style, which is a lever lock style. None of these are applicable to automotive applications. The wire nuts, everybody knows, take the wire, strip it, twist the wire nut on, connection is good to go. That's fine in a application where there's no vibration, but in an automotive application you have a lot of vibration, and what happens is these will work themselves loose, fall off, connection will break, or it'll be exposed and no longer insulated, so then you have the possibility of having a short or something like that. So if you're buying your connectors for your project, stay away from these. These are for use in a home or business. Next up, most people have seen these. These are going to be your standard insulated crimp-on style connectors. They come in a variety of different sizes for different size wire, different applications for each style. You've got butt splices where you can take two wires, connect them together, crimp it, and have one continuous wire. You have various different terminals for crimping on the end of wires to either plug into. These are female spade connectors, so these would crimp on and connect onto the male terminal of them. Then you have the fork style connectors that'll go underneath a screw. Then you have a couple of insulated connectors. These are male and female connectors here. Crimp them onto the wires, plug them together. It makes a quick connect. I don't recommend using those if it's something that will need to be plugged in and unplugged frequently, but they will work. Then you got some ring terminals, good for grounding and purposes like that, or if you have a terminal strip that has threaded studs on it, they work for that. These are all okay to use in an automotive application, but you want to make sure you're using not only the right size, but you want to make sure that all of these are insulated, but they aren't sealed. So if you're using any of these, it needs to be in a more controlled environment, like inside the interior of the vehicle, and they will work for that. Not the worst choice to make. I'll cover the worst choice right now. I purchased these solely for this video. I will be returning them and getting my money back, even though I should destroy them so that nobody can buy them, but unfortunately that'll just make them produce more, so we don't want to do that. This came in a kit on Amazon. I will not be placing a link for these in the description down below because I do not want people to purchase these. If these never existed or ceased to exist, it would be the best thing ever. These are what they call a T-tap. And the way these work is you have your wire. Take some wire here. You have your wire and you want to make a connection to it. These will go and you place the wire in there, fold it over, use a set of pliers or something, or your teeth, whatever, and clamp it down. And what it does is it pushes this little metal insert that's in here. It basically slices the insulation and then makes it, this metal insert makes an electrical connection point. At that point, you can take and plug in one of your quick connects into the end of it and make your connection there. The problem with these is, a lot of times what you'll get is you get people take and they'll try to put the yellow one on there and they'll clamp it on and then they'll plug into it and it won't make connection. And they find out, oh, this is too large for this wire. So then they'll go either to the next size and try that and it'll work or it won't, or they'll drop down 2 sizes and go to the little one, cram that sucker on there. Well, what happens is when it cuts through this insulation, it also cuts through strands of wire. Well, the wire is sized the way it's sized for a reason, so that it can carry the current needed for that circuit. When you cut the strands, or part of the strands, it's affecting its ability to let the electrons flow, thereby kind of defeating the size of the wire. So do not use these. Take them, well, don't order them. I haven't seen them at wholesalers. I don't know where people are buying them, because bought them before Amazon. I don't know if these are on the shelf at AutoZone or where people have been finding them, but I have removed hundreds and fixed hundreds of wires in vehicles from using those. So please stop buying those stupid things. And I'm talking to you Jeep guys out there. You all seem to love them. Everybody with a Jeep Wrangler thinks they know how to wire stuff up, and I have fixed so much stuff. I digress. Nothing against Jeeps or Jeep people. I owned one. They're fun, but I don't know why you guys are so terrible at wiring, but whatever. Next thing up, these are same as the insulated connectors, except for the actual insulation on here is heat shrink. Application for these is best anywhere there's going to be potential for moisture. So if you're doing anything under the hood, under the vehicle, boats, ATVs, UTVs, this is your connector right here that you're going to want to probably aim towards if you're using a crimp style connector. The whole deal with these is you strip your wire, put it in there, crimp it down, and then heat it, and it'll seal the insulation around the actual connection. These are an excellent option for making good lasting connections. The newest style connection that I've seen recently, and I've honestly, I guess I already have some out, I've honestly never actually used them myself, so we're going to try some out here and see how they work. These are a heat shrink solder connection. So essentially, from what I gather, you take a couple wires, you stick them into where the wires are kind of overlapping, and then you take a little mini torch or something like this, heat them up, the heat shrink will form around the wire, and then you get it hot enough where that solder will actually melt and make a soldered joint. Sounds like a great idea. I can't speak to the longevity of them, but it seems like an awesome idea, so we'll give them a shot here on camera and see how they work. It'll be first time for me, so I want those to work. That sounds like a great option for a lot of people. No matter what you're doing, you're going to need some sort of tools to do it with. So first things first, these are not wire crimpers. Please stop using them to crimp wire. Okay, these are pliers. They have their purpose. Crimping wire is not it. Try to avoid buying the wire stripper crimper combo things. They do not do either application well, so spend a little bit more money and buy a decent set of wire strippers and a decent set of wire crimpers. There's multiple different brands, multiple different styles. Find the ones that fit your application best. but a good basic general set of wire strippers, these right here. Brand doesn't matter. These ones are Greenlee brand. These are Southwire. They're same basic deal, except they have different size wire that they take care of. These are for real small wire. They go from 26 gauge up to 16 gauge. Higher the number, the smaller the wire, in case you guys didn't know. Then these are more commonly used. These go from 18 gauge to 10 gauge wire. So these are your more common wire strippers that you're going to be using. For your basic all-around crimping needs, set of crimpers like this, these are Klein crimpers. These are going to handle most people's stuff. So something like this is what you want to pick up. There's multiple different brands. Again, I like the Klein ones. I have a set of Channel Lock brand ones that I usually carry with me at work, and I like those real well. I've got a pair of Southwire ones too, but Kleins are kind of the go-to. Professional electrical tools, Kleins, typically what most people like. If you're going to get into doing splicing in the middle of a wire, but you don't want to actually cut the wire, being able to strip the insulation on the wire in the middle is kind of the way to do that. For that, I like these style of crimpers. If you're looking for a pair of these, I recommend the Gardner Bender brand here, or GB. I hate to say it, but it's kind of the only tool from GB that I recommend. The rest of their stuff I haven't been real thrilled with when I've used it. But these, I like these. There's other manufacturers that make these. I prefer these. But the way these will work, and I'm going to try to get this on the small camera here. You have your wire, in a vehicle or whatever. It's going to be in a loom with a bunch of other wires. But pull the wire that you need after you've tested it. That'll be another video. But you get these in there, press, and it'll actually separate the insulation but leave the center conductor intact. That's one way of doing it. Take some sort of center punch, not center punch, but probably like scratch owl or a pick, and then you can take, I hope this shows up on the camera, and you can poke a hole in the center of it. That way you can take your wire that you're splicing in, run it through the center, wrap it around. I've heard it referred to as a military splice. I'm not sure what other terms there are for it. I don't know if that's something that they teach in the military. I wasn't in the military. But that will make a very good connection, especially if you solder it afterwards. Again, if soldering is correct for your situation. So that kind of covers some of the general stuff. Now, if you get into crimping a lot of different styles of connectors where you need a more specific style of wire crimper, I just picked this up on Amazon. I'll put a link for it down there. This is a ratcheting style crimper, and it's got different styles of jaws that go into it for different styles of connectors. The ones that I have in there right now are made for the heat shrink, these heat shrink style connectors, but there's multiple different style jaws all across here. These are for insulated terminals. These are for insulated flag style terminals. That would be like this style, but it's in like a 90-degree deal. There's some applications for those. I don't use them very often. And then you have open barrel terminals. That would be for if you're making plugs for Molex plugs or something like that. these would be the style of connectors you would use, and then these are for ferrules. So if you're getting more into electrical stuff, having a set of crimpers like these might not be a bad idea. These were about $100 on Amazon. I personally will use the heck out of them, but for doing your normal stuff around the house, you probably don't need something like that. So let me get set up here, and I will kind of show you some soldering basics and how to make some splices and kind of go from there. Alright, so if you're going to do soldered connections, there's obviously a couple of things you need. You need some way of soldering it, such as a soldering pen. This is a Milwaukee cordless 12-volt soldering pen. I've had this for a couple years. Comes in super handy. Definitely if you're doing a lot of connections, you're going to want to go with the 4.0 battery or better, because it does eat up batteries pretty quick. The other thing you're probably going to want to have around is a variety of heat shrink tubing. I just picked this up from Amazon again, and it's the same brand that made that crimper I showed earlier. It's a 3-to-1 shrink ratio, so it'll shrink down to a third the size basically, and this is adhesive lined. So when you actually use this and you shrink the heat shrink tubing around the joint that you've made, it has a adhesive that will kind of seep out from the ends of it a little bit, and that's actually sealing that connection from moisture. Can't really speak. Seals the connection from moisture. There's a variety of different colors, different sizes in this. Good little all-around kit. So, and I use a lot of heat shrink, so I thought might as well pick some up, and we'll throw it in the video. Again, link will be in the description. This heat shrink I just picked up at the local Menards store, and it works well. It does not have the adhesive lining, so it is not as waterproof as this stuff is, but still better than just tape. Speaking of tape, if you make electrical connections using the soldering technique, you can insulate it with electrical tape. Make sure you use a good quality electrical tape. This is the 3M Super 33 Plus, probably the best, most versatile electrical tape out there. Don't use the crap that's 99 cents a roll at the dollar store or whatever. I mean, hell, if the dollar store can't even sell it for $1, it really can't be that good. This stuff has a lot better adhesive to it, and it stretches to stay on tight without breaking. So it can also be used in all sorts of different weather conditions. If you've ever used electrical tape in the middle of winter, then you know that it likes to just break and it doesn't want to stick. Stick with the 33 Plus. It'll work well. So going back to our wire that we stripped earlier, let me reopen our hole in the middle of it here with our scratch owl or pick. Take your wire, stick it through the center of it, wrap it around. Now, back when I went to school for my MECP certification, that is Mobile Electronics Certified Professional, if you were unaware, most people are, that right there is technically a sufficient connection. I used to work for a shop that, for some reason, they were completely against us using solder in vehicles. I think it was more due to the fact that they had people with damage claims burning interiors with soldering guns and whatnot. It wasn't necessarily a company policy, but our location, they got the idea that that was a bad idea. So I actually did probably thousands of vehicles for remote starts, just using this style of connection for all of our ignitions, and never once if done properly, never once did I have a problem in the whole time that I did them this way. This is a sufficient connection if done right. Go one step further with it and put solder on it if possible. So when you're soldering, if you have the option and the ability to heat the wire from the bottom side, that's probably the best way to do it. You want the wire to be up to temperature. When you're soldering, you're not just dripping solder over the top of it. You want the actual wire to be at the temperature and melt the solder through the wire. I've seen guys where they've just, like, they want to solder a connection on and they heat up a terminal or whatever and then put a cold wire in it and start dumping solder in it. That's not the best connection. It may work, but it's not the best connection. You want the wire up to temperature as well. And sometimes when you get into bigger wires and you're doing stuff with a torch instead of, you know, a soldering pin like that, that can be tricky to do without starting to melt the insulation on the wire itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and heat this from the bottom side. Like, you know, on the bench like this, it's a little bit easier. It's a little more difficult in a vehicle, but should be getting hot. You want to start the solder to melt, and we'll kind of drag it up onto the wire, and you should be able to see the solder actually start to melt through the wire and be able to drag it around as necessary. After you've soldered it, and you can kind of see the wire soak up the solder. You want to make sure that joint is filled with solder. You don't just want it dabbed a little bit in there. You want it filled up with solder. Once you have that done like that, you want to let that cool off a little bit before you start moving it around. If you start moving it around, then you're going to end up with a cold solder joint. So right now, that's sufficiently cooled. It can be moved now, and it's all right. This joint is now not going anywhere, so it's good to go. In a car where both of the ends are connected to something, not really practical to try to heat shrink it. So you need to tape it up real well. Again, use the Super 33 tape. That'll be your best option. You want to start before the joint, wrap it past, all that good stuff. Try to stick with half wraps. That's where when you wrap it around, you're covering half of your previous wrap with the next wrap. And I'm not going to go super crazy with this on the bench here. This is never going into a vehicle, but you want to make sure you have good sufficient coverage and that it's insulated well. If you're doing a connection like this where you can put heat shrink on it, it is still advised to wrap it with tape beforehand. Purpose for that is sometimes you can have little strands of wire stick out or a sharp little bit of solder or whatnot. This helps kind of protect that so that when you slip the heat shrink over the top of it, it isn't going to poke through when you shrink it down. That piece of heat shrink is a little bit too small for our application, so we're going to try to step her up a size here. We'll see how this works. When you heat shrink on, you can use something like a heat gun. These work well. Mine seems to be kind of losing a little bit of its effectiveness. I might need to finally replace that 20-year-old heat gun. Or you can use something like this. This is just a mini torch. I picked it up over at the Harbor Freight or Hazard Fraught or whatever you want to call it. They work pretty well. You want to be careful if you're using this inside of a vehicle or around other wires because you'll torch the hell out of everything. You don't want that. Turn off that soldering gun. These are handy because they're butane, refillable, and whatnot. You want to get it warm, but you don't want to torch the holy hell out of it either. You don't want to burn it up. you don't want to burn up the insulation on your wire either. But kind of heat it evenly all the way around. Let it cool off a little bit, and that'll give us a really nice, secure, sealed connection. So this is definitely the preferred way to do your joints in any sort of automotive application. I'm going to see if I can get it up closer to the camera. If you can see right up there at the end, you can see where the adhesive is kind of oozed out of the ends of it. That's how you know that it's shrunk down good and sealed in there. So that kind of covers the basics of making electrical connections and everything. Again, I prefer to use solder joints whenever I possibly can, but there's some times where using a crimp connection is easier, especially if you're out on the trail somewhere and you need to get somewhere and it relies on that sort of connection to be made. Then a crimp style connection would be perfectly acceptable. If you remember, trail fixes aren't necessarily permanent fixes, so you use what you got to get out of the situation, but make sure you fix it right later, or you're going to break down on the trail later and have to fix it again. So yeah, do that. Before we go, we're going to try out our solder connectors wherever I set those. We're going to find out together how well these work. So let's get a couple ends stripped out here. We'll give these a shot. I'm assuming they use the same industry standard wire colors, so I'm assuming this blue connector is what we need for this size wire. We'll stick that in there. Stick that in there. Well, the heat shrink portion of it's working. You really got to heat the crap out of it to get the solder portion to go and actually flow. Well, you got to heat the crap out of it in order to get the solder to start to flow. I don't want to heat it too god-awful much because I have a feeling it's just going to melt the heat shrink. And it's still hot enough now where it's still a little soft and I could move the actual electrical connection. So I think these probably work, but I'm just looking at the actual solder connection in there, and the solder joint itself, nah, it doesn't look the greatest. But again, I've never done one of these before, so maybe I'm not doing it the right way, but from the videos that I've seen, that's how it's supposed to be. Now, just moving it around here, yeah, she's still hot, so I don't know, we'll let that set for a little while and see if it kind of stiffens up a little bit. I don't know. Maybe it needs more heat, but like I said, I don't want to destroy it, because I would think that the outer insulation would start to burn off before too long. But I mean, it's connected, I guess. No, it isn't. I don't know. Whatever. Maybe we don't want to buy those. Maybe I didn't do it right. Let's try another one. Let's try a red one on here. Maybe their sizing is a little bit off. I know this size wire is kind of right on the borderline of the blue connectors. Well, no, that doesn't even fit. Take two. We'll see if this works. Well, if you heat it up enough to get that damn solder to shrink, then it just catches on fire. Well, the heat gun doesn't get hot enough to melt the solder. And if you get it hot enough to get the solder to melt, it burns the insulation off. Maybe I'm just dumb. Like I said, I've never used these before. I'll just cut them and solder the joints in myself. So you can take that how you will. I'll put a link down in the description for them, but I personally, I'm not impressed. Maybe I'll do a little more research and see if I can figure out how to get them to work. But maybe these just aren't a good quality connector. I'm not sure. But we'll move on. Next video, I'm probably going to try and cover something along the lines of wire routing and protecting wiring. I see a lot of people just make joints in an engine bay of a car and just run the wire across the engine. That's not the right way to do it. So we'll kind of cover some of that stuff and then maybe get into switching and relays so that you can understand how switches work, how relays work, and when you need to use relays. So until then, we'll see you next time. Later.